The sewing machine in the corner of Queen's small room was never hers. It belonged to an aunt who had once stayed with them, but left in anger when her quarrels with Queen's father became unbearable. The machine sat there, silent, a reminder of a world Queen longed to enter, but dared not touch without permission. At 18, she was already known in her neighborhood as the girl who never strayed from her father's expectations. "Queen," Peter's voice boomed from outside. "You had better be reading. If I come in and find you wasting time, you'll regret it." She quickly slid her mathematics notebook across her lap and bent over it. Her hands trembled as she picked her pen. To her, reading had become less about knowledge and more about survival. Sarah, her mother, often tried to soften Peter's harshness. "Do as your father says," she would whisper when they were alone. "He only wants the best for you. One day you will understand." But Queen already understood something different. She understood that her dreams were stitched into fabric, not carved into scalpels. Her fingers itched for thread and cloth, not anatomy diagrams. Yet every day she wore the mask of the dutiful daughter. Her friend Miriam sometimes laughed at her seriousness. "You never notice things," Miriam would say as they walked back from the market. "Do you know how many girls plan their outfits just to come to church? Not for Mass itself, but to catch a glimpse of Oliver." Queen frowned. "Oliver, who is Oliver?" Miriam gasped dramatically. "Don't tell me you don't know. Oliver Luther, the second son of Chief Luther, the one who serves on the altar every Sunday. Girls talk about his face, his smile, the way he carries himself." "I have more important things on my mind," Queen replied, her voice sharp. Miriam sighed. "You act like an old woman. You'll wither before your time." What Miriam never understood was that Queen's life had no space for girlish fantasies. Peter's rules were iron. Crushes, as he often thundered, were sins of distraction. To look at a boy with longing was to invite disgrace. But fate had its own fabric to weave. Queen often climbed the hill behind the church to study. It was a quiet place where the rustle of trees and the stretch of sky gave her some breathing space. One late afternoon, she found someone already there. "Forgive me," the young man said, rising from the rock where he had been sitting. His voice was gentle, with the kind of respect that disarmed her. "It's fine," Queen said, clutching her books. He smiled. "You are Queen, aren't you? I see you at Mass sometimes." She stared at him, puzzled. "You know my name." "Everyone knows you. You're the girl who answers every catechism question before anyone else. I'm Oliver." Her chest tightened with unease. Miriam's words returned, but she pushed them aside. "I come here to read. If you want the place, I can leave." "No," he said quickly. "Stay, I won't disturb you. I only come here to think." Something about his calmness kept her from walking away. Days turned into weeks, and their meetings on the hilltop became frequent. Sometimes they spoke of faith, sometimes of dreams. Queen confessed once, almost in a whisper, "I wish to be a fashion designer." Oliver's eyes lit up. "Then why not pursue it?" "My father wants me to be a doctor. He says it is the only way out of poverty. If I fail him, he will never forgive me." Oliver's gaze softened. "But if you bury your own dream, won't you fail yourself?" His words lingered in her heart like the scent of new fabric. She tried to resist, but every time she saw him on the altar during Mass, she remembered the peace she felt when speaking with him. One evening, as the sky dimmed into purple, they sat close together. She tried to read, but her eyes strayed to his face. He spoke of how his mother wished him to become a priest, yet sometimes he longed for a simpler life. Their conversation slipped into silence, then into closeness, then into a moment she could neither explain nor stop. That night, innocence was left behind. Months later, the truth grew inside her. Queen pressed her hand against her stomach and trembled. She tried to hide it from Sarah, but mothers see what others miss. "Queen," Sarah whispered one evening, "tell me it isn't what I think." Tears slid down Queen's cheeks. "Mama, I don't know what to do." Sarah clasped her hand tightly. "Your father must not hear this from anyone else. It will destroy him. We must tell him ourselves." But when Peter found out, his fury was like a storm. He smashed his palm on the table. "Who is responsible?" he demanded. Queen hesitated, but his roar forced the truth from her lips. "Oliver Luther." Peter's face turned red with rage. "The son of Luther? That boy will not ruin my name. I will drag him and his family to answer for this shame." The Luther mansion was unlike anything Queen had ever stepped into. Polished floors, chandeliers, walls filled with family portraits. But none of its beauty softened Mrs. Luther's sharp glare when Peter spoke. "Your son has brought disgrace to my daughter," Peter declared. "He must take responsibility." Mrs. Luther rose from her chair. "My son is destined for the priesthood. Do you think I will allow a poor girl to destroy his future? If you spread this, I will ensure your family pays dearly. Do not dare to tarnish the Luther name." Queen sat in silence, her heart sinking as her father argued, but the decision had already been made. That night, Oliver was sent back to the seminary. He wrote no letter. He left no word. He simply vanished. Mrs. Luther devised a cruel solution. Samuel, the eldest son, would marry Queen, not out of love, but to bury the scandal. Samuel obeyed, though his eyes betrayed reluctance. From that day, Queen's life entered a cage gilded with sorrow. The wedding was rushed. No feast, no laughter, no songs. Only the hurried chanting of prayers and a few witnesses who whispered behind their hands. Queen stood beside Samuel in her simple dress, her eyes fixed on the floor. When the ceremony ended, Peter placed his hand firmly on her shoulder. "You are a wife now," he said with cold finality. "Do not fail your husband. You have already failed me enough." Sarah dabbed her eyes with her wrapper, whispering blessings under her breath. But Queen felt nothing of blessing, only the heavy weight of betrayal. At the Luther mansion, she was not welcomed as a bride. The servants whispered that she had trapped Samuel. Mrs. Luther ignored her entirely. Samuel treated her with courtesy, but not affection. In that house of marble floors and wide staircases, Queen lived like a shadow. Months later, she gave birth to her daughter, Lily. Holding the child in her arms was the first time in months she had felt joy. Sarah came to visit, her face glowing at the sight of the baby. "This child is your gift, Queen. No matter what people say, remember that." Mrs. Luther, however, stood by the door, arms crossed. "Do not think this child changes anything. You will raise her quietly. Do not stain my household further." Queen bit her lip, but said nothing. She had learned silence was her only shield in that mansion. Samuel rarely entered her room, but when he did, he looked at Lily with something close to tenderness. One night, as Queen rocked the baby, he spoke softly. "She looks like you," he said. "She has your eyes," Queen replied, surprised at her own words. Samuel cleared his throat. "I don't know how to be a husband in this kind of marriage, but I will not let anyone harm the child." For the first time, Queen saw a glimmer of the man behind the obedience. Life in the mansion was lonely. Queen longed for her hilltop, for the sound of Oliver's voice, for the hum of the sewing machine that once sat unused in her room at home. One afternoon, while walking through the servants' quarters, she found an old wooden box. Inside lay pieces of cloth, needles, and a battered pair of scissors. Her fingers trembled as she touched them. She carried the box to her room and began to sew scraps together late at night when the house was asleep. At first, her stitches were clumsy, but with each piece, she grew steadier. The act of sewing became her prayer, her escape, her secret rebellion. Every dress she patched for Lily, every fabric she shaped, stitched together the fragments of her own broken spirit. Years passed. Lily grew into a lively child, running through the mansion with laughter that even Mrs. Luther could not silence. Queen protected her fiercely. She sold small items she had sewn to friendly servants in exchange for coins, which she tucked away for Lily's future. Samuel noticed her sewing one evening. "Where did you learn this?" he asked, watching her needle flash under the dim lantern light. "I've always wanted to design," she admitted. He studied her for a moment. "Then do it. Even if no one here values you, make something that does." His words startled her. Samuel rarely encouraged her, but that night she saw him differently. Though their marriage had been forced, he was no tyrant. Slowly, he began spending more time with Lily, reading to her, carrying her on his shoulders. The bond between them grew quietly, like a seed sprouting in shadow. Meanwhile, Queen's name began to spread beyond the mansion walls. Servants whispered about her skill with fabric. A trader in the market who saw Lily wearing one of her mother's dresses offered to buy 2 more. Word reached the town that Mrs. Luther's unwanted daughter-in-law had a hidden talent. When Peter heard of it, he was furious. "So, you disgrace me again," he shouted when Queen visited with Lily. "Instead of focusing on your duties as a wife, you chase after needles and thread." Sarah pulled him aside. "Peter, leave her. She is finding her way." But Peter only spat. "Her way leads to ruin. She will never prove me wrong." Queen stood quietly, holding Lily's hand. For the first time, her father's rage no longer frightened her. She had discovered a strength he could not control. One Sunday morning, everything shifted. The church was crowded. Queen sat with Lily, who was now 7, while Samuel served as usher. When the choir began, the congregation turned their heads toward the altar. A priest entered, tall, composed, his face familiar yet changed by years of distance. Queen's breath caught. "Oliver." Her past rushed back in fragments. The hilltop, the gentle words, the night of forbidden love. Now he stood in holy robes, his eyes scanning the church. When his gaze met hers, it lingered, stunned, almost disbelieving. Miriam, seated a few pews away, leaned toward Queen. "Do you see? He has returned from the seminary. The whole town will talk of this." Queen sat frozen, her hands tightening around Lily's shoulders. The man who had once promised her freedom had come back, but not as she had dreamed. After Mass, Queen tried to slip away quietly, but Oliver intercepted her near the churchyard. His eyes searched her face, then fell on Lily, who clung to her mother's wrapper. "Queen," he breathed, his voice breaking. "This child, she is mine, isn't she?" Queen stiffened. "You lost the right to ask that when you left without a word." "I never left by choice," Oliver said urgently. "My mother sent me away. She swore I would destroy my calling if I stayed. I wrote to you, but the letters were never delivered." She shook her head. "Even if they had come, what would it have changed? I was given to Samuel before I could even breathe." Oliver's hands trembled as he clasped them behind his back. "I thought of you every day. Do you think vows erased what I felt?" "Then keep your vows," Queen said firmly, lifting her chin. "That is all you have left." At the mansion, Samuel noticed the brightness in Queen's eyes after seeing Oliver. He said little, but his silence carried weight. That evening, while Queen mended Lily's dress, Samuel entered the room abruptly. "Did you speak with him?" His tone was sharp. Queen looked up. "I did." "And?" She sighed. "He wanted answers. I gave him none." Samuel's jaw tightened. "I saw how you looked at him. Do not pretend. You smiled in a way you never smile at me." "Samuel," she said quietly, "what happened with Oliver belongs to the past. My life is here now, with you, with Lily." He turned away, packing. Do you know what it feels like to always be second, to be chosen not for love but for convenience? She rose, stepping closer. Do you know what it feels like to be forced into a life you did not choose? Yet I stayed, I raised our daughter, I built something from nothing. You are not second to me. Samuel searched her eyes, but doubt still shadowed his face. Days later, Oliver requested a private meeting at the Luther mansion. Samuel, against his better judgment, allowed it. They sat in the grand living room. Queen sat stiffly on one end of the sofa, Samuel at her side, Oliver opposite them. Mrs. Luther hovered near the doorway, her face hard. I came to speak truth, Oliver began. I loved Queen, I still do. Mother, you forced me into the seminary. You buried my letters, you destroyed more than you know. Mrs. Luther's voice was sharp. Enough, you are a priest. Speak no more of earthly ties. Oliver's gaze flicked to Queen. Tell me you feel nothing. If you say it, I will leave this house forever. The room was silent. Samuel's fists clenched at his sides. Queen drew a long breath. What I feel when I see you, Oliver, is pain, not longing. Pain for the girl I was, pain for the silence I endured. I do not love you anymore. My life is with Samuel. Oliver's face crumbled. He bowed his head. Then I will carry the weight alone. That night, Samuel could not sleep. He stood by the window, staring out at the moonlit garden. Queen watched him from the bed. You don't believe me, she whispered. He turned. I want to, but jealousy eats at me. She rose, walking to him. Samuel, you may not have been my choice, but you became my home. You cared for Lily when no one else would. You let me sew when others mocked me. Do you think that means nothing? His breath shuddered. Why would you give your heart to a man you never loved? She touched his hand. Because love can grow in soil we never planned. You are my husband, Samuel. You are the one I love. Tears welled in his eyes, though he turned his face away. She leaned against his shoulder until his arms, at last, circled her. Queen's work as a seamstress blossomed. Wealthy women in town began seeking her designs. She poured her soul into every garment, each stitch carrying a defiance against her father's scorn and her mother-in-law's contempt. One afternoon, she presented Lily with a dress of bright Ankara fabric, tailored to perfection. The girl twirled in delight. Mama, when I grow up, I want to sew like you. Queen smiled, her throat tight. You will sew and study and be whatever you want. No one will force you to be anything else. Samuel, watching from the doorway, felt pride stir in him. For the first time, he saw not the girl forced upon him, but the woman who had built a life from ashes. Peter remained stubborn. When he heard of Queen's growing reputation, he scoffed. She wastes her mind on cloth. She could have been a doctor. Sarah touched his arm. And yet she feeds her child and she is respected. Peter, let go of your pride. But he shook his head. I will not. Still, years softened even the hardest iron. When Lily, now 10, brought her grandfather a finely sewn shirt as a gift, Peter could not refuse. He wore it to church the following Sunday. The congregation whispered in admiration. For the first time, he looked at Queen without anger. The past returned one final time when Oliver sought Queen before departing again. They met in the churchyard, where their story had once begun. I came to say goodbye, he said quietly. I prayed for strength to let go, and now I must obey it. But I needed you to know I never stopped caring. Queen's eyes softened with pity. Oliver, our lives took different paths. You have your vows, and I have my family. The girl you loved is gone. The woman before you belongs elsewhere. He bowed his head. Then I wish you peace, Queen. And I wish you the same, she replied. They parted with no promise, no lingering glance. Only the finality of lives forever changed. In the mansion, years later, Queen stood in her own workshop. Rolls of fabric filled the shelves, young apprentices bent over their work, and Lily, now grown, sketched designs by her side. Samuel entered, carrying a tray of tea. He smiled at the sight of them. "You have built more than a home, you have built a legacy." Queen looked around the room, the humming machines, the laughter of her students, the daughter who carried her spirit forward. She felt a calm she had never known as a child. Later, she visited her parents. Peter, his hair now gray, sat silently as she knelt before him. "Father," she said softly, "I forgive you for everything. I became who I was meant to be, not by your plan, but by God's grace." Peter swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "And I was wrong. You were never a failure." When she rose, Sarah embraced her tightly. As Queen walked home that evening, Lily skipping beside her, she knew her life had been stitched with sorrow and sacrifice. But from every torn seam, she had sewn beauty. The girl who once trembled under her father's roof now stood tall as a woman whose hands shaped dreams into reality. And she vowed never to let her daughter live in fear of her own passion.